Hi, everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, founder of Career Club, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of LinkedIn Live with Career Club. If you're not familiar with Career Club, please check us out at career.club, where we're using proven sales and marketing methods and tools to help people find a career that matters to them. Again, you can check us out at career.club. If you're not following me or Career Club on LinkedIn, I would really recommend that you do. We are posting great content very regularly and want to make sure that you don't miss out on that. Normally at this point, I would say that this is a live session, so please have your comments. But in this case, because of our guest's very busy schedule, and we're pleased to get him when we can, this is actually pre-recorded, so we won't have the opportunity to take your questions or comments. But if you would like to leave comments while you're watching this, you're certainly welcome to. And lastly, I want to, as always, thank my colleague Heather Zinzer, who is the magic behind making these LinkedIn Live podcasts happen. If for whatever reason you're not able to watch this live, you can always watch it on LinkedIn on replay or download on your favorite podcast platform. So with that, I am very pleased to welcome our guest today, Paco Underhill. Many of you will be familiar with Paco by name and by his first book, Why We Buy. Paco is the founder of Envirosell, basically a market research company that uses observation to understand why people do what they do in stores. And Paco is an expert in consumer behavior and shopper behavior, and has recently written a new book called How We Eat, which we'll be talking quite a bit about today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paco. Paco, welcome.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being the founder of Career Club.
Yeah, come on. Well, my pleasure. So, I first discovered you through my older brother, who found you on an NPR broadcast, I think, back in the day. Was it 22 years ago, I think, when Why We Buy came out? And he's like, he knew that I was in market research, and he's like, you have to read this book. It is so informative, but also really entertaining. And I just think that he was right on both counts. What I didn't realize was the impact that book has really had over the years on how people think about retail and understand retail. Do you mind just sort of giving a super quick synopsis on Why We Buy? Because I think a lot of the principles will also feed into what we talk about in How We Eat.
Almost 40 years ago, I used to teach in a doctoral program in environmental psychology, or the effect that space has on people's behavior. And one of the things I taught was fieldwork, and I came up with a way of using a motion picture camera to measure how people move in interior spaces. I had no background in retail banking. I had no background in retail, period. But part of what was interesting, Bob, is when I stepped over the threshold to start offering these services in retail, part of what I found is that there were two tools people use. One was the tool of media research, which is asking people questions. And you can do it in a focus group, you can do it online, you can do it on the phone, you can do it, standing. But it is what people say they do and what people actually do are often very, very different.
Yes.
And that's something I understood. And the second tool people used is sales research. I take the information that comes to me from my cash register, which is a measure of your victories. And that's important. But one of the key aspects to whether you're selling in physical space or you're selling in cyberspace, because we do a lot of our work in cyberspace now, is that's a measure of victories. And one of the keys to doing better isn't just to understand where you're winning, it's to understand where you're losing. Somebody walks in, they walk down the aisle, they look at something, and they walk away. What? Why? Anyway.
So I'm so interested in jumping into our topic. I'm getting ahead of myself. Typically what we do, and we're going to do it now, is an icebreaker to help people get to know you. We call it Rock's Fab 5 Questions, yes? So just a little bit, and I already know some of the answer to these, so fascinating where we're getting ready to go. But first question is just a little bit about where you were born and raised.
My father was a diplomat, so I was conceived in Spain, born at Yale Hospital,
Yes.
and as a babe in swaddling clothes, I was taken to the Far East. And I spent much of my early childhood in Asia. We moved every 18 months. And when I was in my early teens, I got sent back to the U.S. to boarding school.
But if I remember right, Poland, Malaysia.
Poland, Malaysia. We lived in Indonesia. We lived in the Philippines. And we lived in Korea.
Wow. Well, that obviously will inform a lot of where we go with the book and how we eat and sort of the global observations that you've got.
Well, Bob, this is if I can be a little evangelical.
Please.
I grew up with a terrible stutter, and I still have remnants of that now, as people may hear listening to me talk. But a lot of people have said that I took a coping mechanism to a handicap and turned it into a profession. Because as I grew up traveling around the world, it was often uncomfortable for me to ask questions. I had to watch to understand what the rules are. And I think that premise of watching to understand behavioral issues is a real key aspect to understanding how things work.
Well, that's the DNA of Envirosell. And to your earlier point, what people say and what we can observe them doing often are very different things. So I like how you said that. And I appreciate the vulnerability that you just shared there too, with kind of taking something that somebody might perceive as a handicap and turning it into a superpower. So good on you.
I recognized there was a very magical moment, Bob, when I realized that my speech cadence was a little different. And that if I didn't care about the fact that I occasionally stumbled, and I'm a big guy, that people listen to me differently.
6'4", if I remember correctly.
I'm 6'4", I weigh 200 pounds, and I'm about as mean a character as you ever.
Now you're appealing to my Tennessee sensibilities.
Well,
where and a little bit. Where'd you go to school?
I went to a number of different places. I went to Columbia. I was one of the first male co-eds at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I also went to EY University in Seoul.
Oh, wow. Well, being one of the early co-eds at Vassar sounds like a smart move on my part. So well played. And then just a little bit about your family, because that's actually very interesting too.
Well, one of the things I keep pointing out is that I have a very WASP father. I have a Sephardic mother, a Jewish mother, and I have a Muslim wife. So I have to be very careful about being answerable to the priest, the rabbi, and the imam.
You're a walking bar joke. Yeah. And then you kind of got into already just a little bit about how your career got started, but just sort of briefly, do you mind kind of painting a little bit of a picture of how your career has progressed, the career arc, if you will?
Bob, coming out of Career Club, one of the things that we recognize is that classic business education through the through the latter part of the 20th century, in the McKinseys and BCGs and PwC worlds, were often focused on strategy issues.
Yes.
Right? This was the big thinking part of it. But part of what was very telling for us is that as we came into the world of retail, and as we came into the world of brands, and as we came into the world of banking, we were able to come back from doing our research where here is something that you could do next week. Here is something that you could do in 2 weeks. Here's something you could do in 2 months. And here's something you could do next year. And part of what is really interesting is if you can walk in the door or into the web and be able to win some immediate, easy victories, people listen to you.
Yeah.
And that ability, and I still have that experience of being able to walk into a store and actually move a fixture or adjust something in a visual merchandising display, and the store manager will come back to me an hour later if I'm with a group and go, I've sold more in the past hour than I have in the past 2 weeks. And that's just because you understood something. And, some of this, Bob, is just understanding how we see. It's understanding how our body works. And it's understanding what are the biological constants that stay the same. One of the things I love about retail, and it's been so exciting over the past 35 plus years, is that for all of the things that stay the same, there's a bunch of stuff that changes. What made a good store in 2000 and what makes a good store in 2022 are a reflection of the evolution of us. Okay?
Yeah, one of the things that I've always loved about retail and CPG and insights is we can all relate to it. We all go to stores. We all know what the experience is like. One of the easy findings I remember from Why We Buy is kind of that 10-foot dead zone when you first walk into a store, right? And you describe that. And that kind of like my eyes are adjusting, the floor is different, the temperature is different. And I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. When I walk into Costco or wherever, I think about that almost every time I walk into Costco. It's like I'm now transitioning in anything they do between now and by the time I get acclimated to the environment. So it's the relatability of retail because we're all shoppers.
Part of what we have to recognize here, Bob, is that it isn't just about physical retail, though. It is also about how we shop online. And certainly having started with doing cameras and physical retail, I spent the next 30 years building other tools. The company that I founded, its largest clients now are technology companies, technology giants. And that is recognizing, for example, if, over and beyond Amazon, but even on an Amazon, what is the difference between someone who's been to the site 10 times versus somebody who's going to the site for the first time?
Yes.
And the degree to which we understand the difference between the expert and the novice user, or in terms of our national franchise, is that the need states of somebody logging in to an online presence in a rural setting, an exurban setting, and an urban setting have some distinct differences to them. And that trade-off between, what's global and what's local works in physical, but it's also a critical issue in the cyber world too.
So let's because this will all tie together. So you've got a new book out, How We Eat. Do you mind just sort of sharing quickly, what was the basic premise? What was the impetus behind writing the book? And then we'll start to get into some of the key findings.
Well, Bob, part of what I try and do is find business topics that cross over between the business and popular world. And that's part of the reason why I think my books have sold as well as they have and have lasted as long as they have, is that they're entertaining reads. And back when, Simon & Schuster said, Paco, it's time for a brand new book, I stared up at the ceiling and went, you know what? Everybody eats and drinks. Everybody eats and drinks. And you know what? I've worked on supermarkets and restaurants on, more than 40 countries, more than 6 continents. I've got a wealth of information about how things work. And so that's what I'm going to write about. And then, Bob, I got almost half the manuscript done and COVID hit. And COVID was devastating to all of us, but it made me wake up for a second and look at myself in the mirror and go, if you're going to talk about eating and drinking, shouldn't you have a point of view given what's happened in the world? Mm-hmm. So the point of view, and I threw out a healthy part of the manuscript and started over again. And the premise was, if I can help my reader understand the food chain and understand the supply chain, and I can adjust the prescription in their glasses by how they consume food and drink, I can get them to a healthier version of themselves, and I can help get us to a healthier planet, which is something that we desperately need.
Now, word on the street is you got to a healthier version of yourself along the way. What happened?
Well, I just, I said, yeah, man, here I am. It's COVID. I'm going to start understanding better how I consume. And you know what? I've now lost 30 pounds. Uh,
Wow, that's three more
it's,
than I knew.
and, it's been by just eating smarter, exercising smarter, being, just more aware.
So you talked about let's sort of pick it up at this thread because it's something that I was fairly involved with at the time. When COVID hit, I was still at Numerator, and Numerator, it's got a very, very large database of what
Right.
people buy and the demographics and all that. And packaged goods companies, right? The ConAgras, Campbell's, whoever, Kraft Heinz, Smucker, all these guys, like their sales exploded during that period. Some of what I think we learned, or at least it was the explanation at the time. One was obviously they're shelf stable. So if I'm not going to the store as much, then what can I load up in the pantry, which sort of leads to the second thing, which is a little bit of hoarding, or maybe a lot of bit of hoarding. And then the third piece was around comfort, familiarity. These were brands that I knew, that I felt like I could trust. So where would you go with all of that, and how has that influenced how people eat, and was that a lasting trend in your mind?
Well, I think part of what happened when COVID hit is this is for the first time in many, particularly Americans' lifetimes, when the basic infrastructure of their lives were threatened. They had to spend much more time at home. Their kids were kicked out of school and sent home. There was a series of things that people had to adjust to.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they, stocked up on, Campbell's tomato soup, and they bought out the laundry soap section, and they stocked up on toilet paper and whatever. I mean, people, we stockpiled, 6 months, 9 months supply of toilet paper. And, it was a little scary to walk into Walmart, Target, Kroger, and be able to look at all the empty shelves and go, oh my God, what's happened to me when I don't got something to wipe my butt? That said, here, I think one of the poignant issues for all of us is that in this is there a better way for me to understand how I go to a grocery store? Bob, if you walk into your local Stop and Shop in December or January, do you know where the freshest blueberries are?
I'm going to guess in the produce section.
They're in the freezer. They're in the freezer section.
Why is that?
Well, because the blueberries that you see in the produce section came from Ecuador, and they were 10 days away from being picked, whereas the blueberries in the freezer section may have been picked on Long Island or Massachusetts and frozen within 12 hours of being picked.
So you said earlier, part of the premise of the book was, kind of healthfulness for people, but then you also said kind of betterness for the planet. And so I'm guessing that like blueberries coming in all the way from Ecuador, may not be the best thing for the planet versus something that was raised more locally. Yeah.
I think this is part of what we're looking at here is not just, the transportation cost, but how do we get better local? And one of the things that we recognize, Bob, is that in 1950, all of the pundits said the small family farm is dead. Okay. Technology let us get bigger. We had industrial farming, blah, blah, blah. But do you know, in the writing of this book, I interviewed farmers in the Hudson Valley with less than 5 to 10 acres who were doing just fine because they had greenhouses, they had solar panels, and they found ways to go direct to the consumer without having to go through a wholesaler. And part of what this means is that if you go to a farmer's market today, in many places, the range of stuff that you can get and the immediacy of it. How many of us have used CSA? consumer supported agriculture, where we find a farmer in March and we pay him a certain sum of money. And starting in May, we get a box of vegetables and fruit of whatever is ripe for that given moment, and learning how to deal with that. How do we understand what is fresh and understand what is healthy? We also know that the world of packaging that was invented in particularly the 1950s and 60s is desperate for reinvention, that the concept of recycling is not working particularly well.
That's right.
Is not working particularly well. I mean, the number of, Campbell's soup cans that actually get recycled is minimal. The number of plastic bottles that do it. Part of what is exciting here is that not only does our design community know that, meaning that I can make a container out of birdseed rather than that cardboard. And I can take that box as I finished it, and rather than stuff it back in the garbage can and hope that it goes back to the recycling center for somebody to do something with it, I can go feed it to the blackbirds and the sparrows.
I think that's cool.
How do I use my composting process? You know that in other parts of the world, you don't get milk in a sort of plastic cardboard container. You get it in a recompostable bag. And the bag fits into a pitcher. You slice off one corner of it. You pour the milk that you need from it. And then when it's over, that bag crumples up into something that is really small. And then you can throw it in your compost heap.
That's cool.
I mean, it's a part of what, this has to happen. It has to.
Well, you're talking about packaging, and I don't know if this is clever or not, but, we talk about carbon footprint. I wonder about cardboard footprint. All these boxes that are getting shipped all over the place, like, what's your cardboard footprint? I want to go back, though, to farmers markets for a minute, Paco, because you talk about the Hudson Valley. We could also talk about Hudson Yards in New York City. I'd love for you to talk just a little bit, because you said that, the age of the family farmer is over. Well, that was the rumor, but then actually that's not true. And I'd love for you to maybe riff for a minute on urban farming and how many vertical acres do you have, and how that's really kind of, engendered the ability for people to get truly fresh, locally grown food.
Bob, this is one of the contributions that the marijuana farmers have gotten for us. All those farmers in the Netherlands and British Columbia that figure out ways of growing hydroponic pot. Okay? Mm-hmm. And there is now the nascent technology to be able to take shipping containers, okay, and have a hydroponic solar garden inside that shipping container and be able to grow leafy vegetables right there, whether it's in an urban setting or whether it's in the parking lot of the local grocery store. One of the ironies there is that we looked at a grocery store chain that experimented with it. And part of what the problem was, which was interesting, is they couldn't sell all of the greens in the location that they were growing. Because part of what it is that we aren't eating greens at breakfast in the morning. Mm-hmm. We aren't juicing whatever. This isn't, this is making really, arugula and baby leaf lettuce. Baby leaf lettuce, gram per gram, is the healthiest food on the planet.
Or would guess kale or something like that.
There's a wonderful lineup on the BBC.com where they list the healthiest foods: baby lettuce and raw almonds. Ooh. And I have, almond butter is now an integral part of my daily diet. Pumpkin seeds. Have you ever tried pumpkin seed butter?
I've never heard of pumpkin seed butter.
You can buy pumpkin seed butter on, at your local health food store. But pumpkin seeds, again, raw, unsalted, are just incredibly healthy. It's
Nice.
a great snack food.
So a lot of our audience that'll be listening to this, Paco, will be people that work at big food companies.
Yes.
What would be a couple, three messages that when you're working with big food companies that you would really like? If you guys don't get anything else, you need to understand how eating is changing and how they can win in this new world.
Well, I'd certainly think there are a number of things. First of all, is one of the things that is coming to us is the answerability of the food industry and the grocery industry, not to shareholders, not to Wall Street, but the consumer. And that deals with how things are organized in terms of the grocery store, so that the concept of slotting fees that has driven the design of grocery stores is fundamentally being shifted with Aldi, Lidl, Trader Joe, so on. Second is that the truth in packaging. If I have a cranberry juice cocktail, but the cranberry content of it is under a certain percentage, do I have the really right to call it cranberry juice cocktail? If I have a cereal that has more than a certain percentage of sugar content in it, it may very well end up on the candy aisle rather than the cereal aisle. I mean, these are all some of the shifts that are coming with the nutrition conscious consumer who is going, I need you to do this better. And therefore, part of what I think is really important for big food is to recognize what's coming and recognize that having a better offering is a great story for marketing.
Yeah.
And that story about how healthy this is for you and being able to talk about what the nature of content is, I think is a really critical issue for us moving forward.
So you mentioned slotting. Go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
Make my point here is that if you think of 20th century marketing, it was information being pushed down by the brands. Okay. And one of the things that we're coping with, Bob, courtesy of podcasters like you here, is the fact that often things are bubbling up. Okay. And I think the important issue for the 21st century marketer is to understand what is bubbling up from the consumer and from local organizations. So,
go ahead. I want to make sure you're finishing.
No, good. I mean, I'm.
So one of the things that we see is a lot of investment dollars are going into these younger companies that are doing the innovation, and then big food is kind of relying on an innovation by acquisition strategy, right? But we're seeing lots and lots of investment dollars going into better for you kinds of food companies that are doing really well. And then, it becomes the innovation lab for big food.
I visited, maybe 6 weeks ago, a place called The Factory in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where it's an investment group that purchases what they view as good nascent brands and builds them up. And they bring some professional talent to the marketing of it, the packaging of it. But the concept is, I buy something for 2 to 10 million, and I sell it for 100.
There you go. But back on slotting, and maybe kind of looking at this more from the retailer's lens, you give a great lesson in most new products fail. There's all these kinds of foods that people seem to be moving more off trend, and yet it takes up a disproportionate amount of the real estate inside of a retailer. So maybe one is, if you could explain for the audience why that is, and then two, what your recommendation would be to retailers maybe to repurpose that space.
Okay, well, two things. First of all, if you go to Walmart, Kroger, HEB headquarters, there's a lineup of conference rooms where the buyer sits on one side of the table and the brand sits on the other, and they fight. It's maybe polite, but they fight. They fight over pricing, they fight over delivery, and they fight over where it sits on the shelf. Okay, those are what contribute to the fact that in most American retail, what is at eye level is brands who have paid for the privilege of being there. Okay. I think part of what we're going to get at is, first of all, how do we understand better fleet management from the standpoint of retail? And this is one of the things, Bob, that I think retail AI is starting to get at, which is, what is the difference between a Kohl's that sits in El Paso, Texas, and a Kohl in Duluth, Minnesota? Okay. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that if I'm a grocery store chain or I'm a fashion chain or I'm a fast food chain, that there's an infinite array of buckets. But there are a series of buckets that are really practical and help central management get closer to what that retail location is. I am reminded, having served on the boards of numerous Israeli technology companies, that one of the issues that my IDF or Israeli Defense Forces friends always tell me is battles are won when generals get to the front. Okay? And I think one of the ironies about particularly on American business or global business is that you find the desk farthest away from the front door, and that's where the person in charge sits. Mm. That shift here between understanding what is global and what is local is one of the keys in fleet management. And that deals with whether it's a physical location, but it also is about the design of our cyberspace too.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, if I'm a site and somebody is logging in from a rural location, are they seeing the same screens as somebody who's dialing in from San Jose, California? I think this is, again, some of those shifts here, which are, how do I adjust both the images, the pictures, the language, the adjacencies, and the nature of the offering?
Mm. When you were talking about in the store and things that are eye level and that brand paid for the privilege, that's a slotting fee, correct? Yep. And where does that fit into the retailer's revenue and or profitability?
Well, I think particularly if you're a grocery store chain, historically slotting fees have been absolutely critical.
Right. And so it's very, very precious and very hard to give up. Right.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why everybody is looking at Trader Joe's, Aldi, and Lidl. Okay. And if we think of the disruption that Aldi and Lidl earned across Europe, particularly Western Europe, and the disruption that a Trader Joe's is generating here, where there's a level both of customer loyalty to it, and there's a use of house brands and the trust in the curatorial judgment of the buyer.
Mm. Yeah, and then one, which is really, and then also SKU optimization, right? Because they don't have this giant proliferation of SKUs to have every brand. It's like, I don't need to have every brand. You guys already trust my brand.
Yes.
And these limited footprint formats. But one of the things that I'd like for you to talk about, if you could, is how sampling could be a much more critical and be much more experiential and creating that kind of an environment inside a retail store, and what the impact would be both for the retailer and for the manufacturer.
Well, I mean, first of all, part of what we know is that a good merchant is trying to look at all five senses and the degree to which I can stimulate all five of those senses through someone's experience in store. So the smell, the taste, the look, the hear, whatever, the touch. One of the things that we know, Bob, is that one of the roles that sampling plays in a grocery store or, at Costco is that if I can get somebody's saliva glands working, they become a much less disciplined shopper. So we know, again, from our observational research, is that people who sample tend to buy more. And the purpose of sampling isn't just to get you to buy what you've just sampled, but is to get those saliva glands working. So as you munch on or crunch on something walking down the aisle, you go, ooh, that looks really good. Maybe I should take a little try at that one. Anyway.
So we've talked a lot about food. There's a whole really great section in the book, though, around drinks and maybe more specifically alcoholic beverages. How is that kind of evolving in post-COVID, and what advice would you be giving to our friends that make adult beverages?
Well, one of the things that was happening before COVID started is the explosion of both wine making, beer making, and spirits making on a local level. And you go to the farmer's market in New York City, and there is somebody selling whiskey and vodka that are made within 100 miles of where they're. And this is, every year there are thousands of distilling licenses that are issued, and people are making rum, whiskey, vodka, just locally, and they're often locked out of the traditional distribution networks. So they are finding ways to get to the public. It's also about the changing consumer of adult beverages. One of our findings here, which was I laugh about, is that we had a program using eye tracking glasses, where we would recruit somebody as they were going into a bar and restaurant. We asked them to wear the glasses, which record what they look at and what they're focusing on for the first half an hour inside the bar or restaurant. And then we asked them to come out and look at the tape of what they looked at and be able to deconstruct some of it. One of the things that we found was there are a remarkable number of women whose adult beverage choice in a restaurant or a bar is based on what they're wearing. And the male researchers would go, "What are you talking about?" And the female researchers would go, "Man, dude, don't you understand that if I'm wearing a white dress or a white blouse, do I really want to be drinking red wine?" And that's, again, but Bob, I am one of the owners of a wine bar in the East Village. It's called Ruffian. I think we just got our 4th Michelin sighting. Okay.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah. And we specialize in orange wines, meaning wines from Eastern Europe. Okay. And we serve vegan tapas. Okay. 65% of our customers are female. Are they coming to our wine bar to get sloshed? The answer is no. Are they coming to, eat burgers and whatever? No. They are looking to eat lightly, to eat really well, and to have a glass or two of really good wine. But 65% of them are female. One of the things that I've learned now is if I walk an urban street and I look into a restaurant, I do a little quick math in my head. What's the number of women in that restaurant versus men? How many tables are what look like girlfriends eating together? And would I rather, if there's a restaurant that has more than 60% of females in it, do you think they serve better food? The answer is, I defer often to the curatorial judgment, but it's also a reflection, Bob, of one of the fundamental shifts in spending power, which is, while there is a glass ceiling, okay, and particularly women over age 30 are subject to the glass ceiling as they have children, they have marriages, whatever. But if you go to almost any Western city, New York, San Francisco, London, that a working 28-year-old female is generally out earning her male counterpart. That if we look at graduates from colleges, from graduate schools and universities, 60% of them now are female. If you look at, key institutions of higher learning, from, law to even business school, the number of female graduates is higher. And the way they consume and use their money and the way historically men consumed and used their money are different. And that's exciting.
Now, boy, there's a bunch of places to go off of that. One is we had talked previously about the difference between gender and generation, and that you actually see you're kind of like in households with multi-generation and things like that. Could you expound on that point for just a minute?
Well, Bob, when I stepped off into New York City, my buddy and I were able to find really cheap, exquisite housing. Whereas my stepdaughters, as they move from city to city, are generally more in friends situations here, where there are multiple people all sharing an apartment. So if I think of my youngest stepdaughter, there's often a refrigerator in her bedroom, a little one, where she keeps her stuff. And there's a refrigerator in the kitchen where they keep everybody's stuff. I mean, there's a generational issue in terms of how we consume that is based on housing issues. One of the poignancies, Bob, is that according to the 2020 census, less than 25% of American households were Leave It to Beaver, where you had two parents and, dependent children in them. And it isn't that we don't have dependent children, but, the number of houses where adult kids are living at home over age 18, or there are more than three generations living under one roof, which is one of the truisms of stepping away from, Western civilization, where we get away from the concept of the nuclear family.
So how would you encourage, a marketer or a retailer to leverage that reality?
Well, I think one of the things which I thought was really interesting working with Walmart Canada many years ago is they did a very good job of understanding what were some of the key offerings that would earn the loyalty of a particular ethnic group who lived in a particular community. So if you think of halal meat, for example, halal meat is the equivalent in Islam to kosher, to kosher meats. And having a Walmart in Toronto with that halal meat section in it meant that there was a loyalty to the Muslim family who would make the choice as to where they shop based on some criteria. And while it drove the purchase of that particular meat, it also drove the purchase of Tide and everything else. And that's part of what that concept of getting local is. I can remember going to a Target a number of years ago in Jersey City. And I was with a group from Target. We were visiting ex-urban stores. And I met the store manager and I said, "Do you have any banana ketchup?" And she looked at me and went, "I have no idea what you just asked me." And I said, "Well, you were here in Jersey City, which has the largest Filipino American community as a percentage of any community in the USA. And banana ketchup is a fundamental Philippine condiment. And that if you had a little Philippine food section in the context of this Target in this location, your customer loyalty would soar." And he laughed and go, "But how do I convince Minneapolis of that?"
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah.
Last thing, because I want to be mindful of the time, but this is very top of mind for, I think, many of our listeners, is in these inflationary times, the role of money And could you maybe speak to that for a minute? Because I know it's something you have a strong point of view on.
Well, I think part of what is really critical is understanding how we consume better. Okay? One of the ironies of grocery shopping, which I've learned all over the world, is that a percentage of our produce purchases gets thrown away because we don't get around to consuming them. And that one of the keys to being able to manage your kitchen is to make sure that what you bring in the front door to consume, that you find a way to manage it. We also know that in the broader world of consumption, that we passed over a magic moment in the late 1990s. Up until that moment, the overwhelming majority of global wealth was in the hands of an aristocracy who knew what they were buying. In 2020, 2022, money has lost its peaches and cream complexion. And that recognizing that one of the ways that we often get people to trade up is to educate. And how do we do a better job of getting people to consume better? Do you know there are Italian supermarket chains that have a cathedral, like the Superstore or the Victoria's Secret, flagship that sits in Herald Square, which its purpose is not just to sell, but also to tantalize and to get people to expand there. There are grocery stores which aren't meant to be visited every week. They're meant to be visited once a month, where people will teach you how to cook stuff. They will teach you about vegetables you've never had before. Have you ever had a watermelon radish, Bob?
No, sir.
It is a radish that is incredibly tasteful. You plant it generally in late summer and you harvest it in late fall. It is now one of my favorite vegetables. Would I have ever bought it if somebody hadn't found a way to in the farmer's market to offer me a sample?
So with respect to being educated, making more thoughtful choices, you talked very early on about what I would typify as the actionability of your insights. Over the next year, if I am a CPG or their retail partner, with respect to pricing, money, value, experience, what would be the one or two things you would just really want me to focus on?
Well, I think, first of all, if you're one of the brands, being able to address the subject of education, I think is really important. And that we have to realize that there is no more line between a physical and a cyber world, that a remarkable number of people are moving through a grocery store with that phone in their hands. And that one of the things that if I'm General Foods, or I'm General Mills, or I'm Procter & Gamble, is getting people to understand their product better.
Yeah.
And recognizing, for example, that if I'm Tide, educating people as to how little laundry soap I actually need to put in my washer. What does concentrate mean? I mean, those are all subjects. What is portion control? Those are all things that are, again, crossover that physical and cyber world, and the degree to which somebody can use both a firm's website, but also social media. Many of us are learning our cooking skills, based on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And I think the big brands need to embrace that.
Yep. And do you think that it is inevitable that if we do, in fact, go into this recessionary period, inflation is stubborn, that the consumers, by and large, will trade down? Or do you think that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for more premium brands?
Well, I think the light at the end of the tunnel for the premium brands is basically making the customer understand what it means to be a premium brand. It's based on ingredients, it's based on whatever the criteria is. But simply being able to say, oh, this t-shirt is $33 and this t-shirt is $2, doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there are many of us who have recognized that we as a species are better off with fewer, better things.
Fewer, better.
That concept of premium or luxury is something that is a 20th century concept. That part of what I'm trying to communicate is value and quality. And that value and quality also is reflected in price, but it's also reflected in how or the longevity that you have something.
Yep. Okay. This has been fascinating. And I feel bad because I've got like 100 more questions I want to ask you, but I'm looking at the clock and I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time. Yeah. So all I can say, and Heather, if you can maybe flash these up in a second, but the Paco's 2 books, Why We Buy is required reading for anybody that's got anything to do with anything that has to do with retail. You have to read this book. It's timeless. And then How We Eat, I loved. It is very accessible. It is not just like Why We Buy. I think you talked earlier about kind of the pop piece of it, it's very accessible. It's entertaining. You wrote How We Eat in a very conversational tone, even in a dialogue in a lot of places, which I found very entertaining. And it made it easy to take in the information and to retain, what you have learned and what you're sharing with people. I just can't recommend the books highly enough. And Paco, as I said at the beginning, I'll say at the end, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. If folks wanted to learn more about you or potentially contact you, what's the best way to do that?
There are 2 ways of doing it. One is pacounderhill.com. The other is my email address is paco@envirosell.com.
Got it.
paco@envirosell.com. Send me a note.
Awesome. Well, again, you're just a fount of information, plus you're fun, which is like the greatest combination. It's a pleasure to know you. It's a pleasure to have you today. And I just want to thank you and hope our audience enjoyed this as much as I did.
Bob, thank you. And good luck with Liverpool.
Season starting next week. I'm excited. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.